Welcome to The Craft. I'm your host, May Globus. This podcast is a collection of intimate conversations on artistry, mastery, and life with talented, passionately curious creatives and entrepreneurs. Most are dear friends, some are those I've admired from afar. I hope you enjoy these conversations, this exploration of the humanity that connects all of us, as much as I do having them. Thank you for being here and for listening. To boil down the essence of Steve Rio down to a few adjectives is next to impossible. The musician, former founder of the creative agency Briteweb, and current co-founder of Enfold Institute, has a calm, centered inner compass that feels very rare in our often chaotic world. He was made in Hong Kong and born and raised in Vancouver to two entrepreneurial parents who gave him room to do the things he wanted to do. This made him resourceful and independent, but that parental support was not always the emotional kind. A long lover of music, he spent many years in a band before moving fully into the creative and agency space, splitting his time between Vancouver and New York. After a transformative experience with 5-MeO, often called the world's strongest psychedelic, he began the next chapter of his life's work in the psychedelic space. In this conversation, we explore deeply his dynamic with his parents, how music saved him from being fully emotionally detached, the major chapter of his life being in a band and his current reflections on that time, starting Briteweb and what it taught him about himself, the adolescent hunt for spiritual transcendence and how psychedelics helped him achieve that at a young age, the natural path he and his wife Austin took to founding Enfold Institute and facilitating 5-MeO medicine ceremonies, my recent and very profound ceremony experience with them, their continued involvement in psychedelics and what's coming next, his mini love letter to Austin, and more. Please enjoy this vast and spacious conversation with the reflective, conscious, and beautiful human, Steve Rio. Steve Rio, welcome to The Craft.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to see you in real life again. And I'm excited for this conversation. I feel like it can go in many, many different ways. And we've recently spent some time together on your property. I did a medicine ceremony over there, so you got to know me quite well.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about how we connected, which is how I always start my shows. And I remember hearing your name way back in the day because you were a co-founder of the Cheaper Show. And
right.
I had come a few times to the parties or the shows. And I remember thinking back in the day, oh, this is the coolest thing that Vancouver's doing right now. And so I remember seeing your name first there and then seeing it in connection with Briteweb. But we had never crossed paths until recently through some serendipitous moments and signs. And and here we are.
That's interesting. The Cheaper Show was a lot of fun. And I'll clarify, I wasn't a co-founder, but I came in for the last few years. Good friends of mine were co-founders of it. And I remember going to, I think, the 2008 show, the first one in Gastown, the first big one in Gastown. And I remember being like, this is the coolest thing ever.
100%.
And also seeing all my friends just scrambling to kind of pull it off because it was way bigger than they expected. And they were all sort of maxing their credit cards out to just pay for the beer and, just doing everything they could to pull it off at that scale. And I remember being there and saying, this is the coolest thing ever. And my sort of business mind and operational mind said, oh, I can help. This doesn't have to feel like this. This could be way more structured. And so I came in for the last few years and helped raise money and get the city involved and get nonprofit status and do all sorts of corporate partnerships and just build an operational backbone to the thing. So it was super fun to be involved in that.
Whatever happened to it? Because I remember when it stopped, I really did wonder because I thought it was so great for the city.
Yeah, I know. I did the 9th and 10th show, and the 10th show was huge, and it was really awesome. But I feel like I decided after that it wasn't, I actually had an interesting experience where a very well-known, very wealthy person in the city was basically willing to fund some mega growth of the Cheaper Show. And I remember coming out of a meeting at this person's home and basically they had basically just said, well, you tell us what you want to do and we'll write the check. And I remember on the walk from the house to my car realizing, oh, I don't want to do this. And it was super interesting. It was it was one of the first times where somebody was saying, oh, I'll pay, you know, we weren't really getting paid much to do that show. You know, it was really just like hustling super hard. And I think I made, you know, $30,000 for the year worth of work. And it was like one of the hardest things I've ever done, you know? And this person was saying, I will fund this. Let's go. And I remember walking back from the car and realizing, oh no, it's not about money. I have to move on. I'm ready to move on from this. And so I left the show, and I just don't know that I don't know if Graham just didn't want to continue it. Graham's one of the he was kind of the remaining founder. The other co-founders had sort of dropped off, and however that happened. But I feel like either Graham couldn't find the right people to help him take it forward. I think that was mostly what it was. Like, it was a beast, and he needed someone who could really run it with him and kind of for him in a way. Like, he could do he has a gift of bringing people together and doing these he has like all these gifts, but operationalizing a massive show is not one of them, you know?
Right.
And
yeah.
I think that's part of it. I think it was hard to find the right person to help him take it to the next level. Yeah.
I hope something like that comes back, like a
I know.
2.0. I feel like the city is ready for something like that again. I'm seeing lots of creative communities doing some really cool things right now, and I feel like there's a really big interest. I think especially in the younger generation, they're hungry for something
to
like
bring
that.
everybody together, because Vancouver has a real lack of ability to do that on its own. People don't seem to connect in a way that they do in other cities, you know?
Yeah.
And Cheaper Show really was incredible for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was really nothing like that where it brought thousands of people together.
There wasn't, no. So
And getting that sort of international attention for artists. I mean, in the last year, we got applications to be in the show from artists from, I don't know, hundreds of cities around the world. It was just wild. Yeah, it was super cool.
Well, I'm really glad that Vancouver had those years,
I
or
agree.
that moment. That's awesome. That's really awesome. But I'd love to turn this back over to you. And you were made in Hong Kong.
I was
born and raised in Vancouver.
Hmm.
Tell me about childhood.
What do you want to know about childhood? That's a big question. Where do I start with that one?
Maybe start with your parents. What are they like? Each one of them,
It's like, sure.
individually.
What I can say about both of them, they're both really, really, I think, core values around hard work and respect and dignity. Like, they both, one thing I've learned from them, and I've seen both sides of the sword on this, but seeing that they don't compromise their values for any sort of, like, they'll never let money compromise their values, or some opportunity compromise their values. Their values are really first and foremost. So they have a real sense of who they are in that regard. And my dad is like, I feel like he invented himself out of his upbringing in some ways, where he grew up in I would say a fairly tough home, with not a lot of emotional support, and probably, I don't know how to characterize it. I won't characterize it for him, but in a fairly tough home. And, for instance, he decided to go to UBC and take computer science when it was just a brand new thing. Basically, when IBM started inventing the computer, they started building programs at different universities, and then they would try and get people to come join this new science, basically this new discipline, right? And nobody really knew what it was. And I think my dad was kind of laughed at by his family and sort of very confused. Like, his family is very confused about why are you going to go do this thing in university? Why aren't you getting a trade like everybody else? And I think he was very misunderstood for that, but he went and did it, and kind of invented, like, along the way, just kept inventing himself beyond the scope of visibility of what his family could see, you know? And his sister is a lot like that too. She's totally like that as well. Like she's done all sorts of wild things and she's still doing wild things, you know? She's doing her PhD now in her 70s and still refuses to retire. She still teaches grade 3s or something like that and does this insane program with her classes. She brings in woodworking tools and does all sorts of wild stuff with them. And
wow.
Anyway, so like they're both just like very very resourceful in that way, and very like salt of the earth in a way where there's no, I don't know, there's no bullshit. You know, I think with both my parents, there's not a lot of bullshit. And my mom similarly came from a very emotionally closed home. Her dad passed suddenly when she was in her, I think 13 or so. And her mom emotionally shut down at that time. And so she grew up, her mom was a very tough, very smart, very entrepreneurial woman, like did a lot of cool things and was like in one way, very inspirational, really powerful woman. And was also really emotionally shut down and very hard on my mom and very unsupportive in certain ways. And I think both my parents kind of have that aspect as part of their core self, you know?
Right.
And so what I would say about my parents is that they are, like, in terms of thinking about how they raised me, they did absolutely the best they had with the tools they had. And what that looked like was giving me this sense of belief that I can really do anything that I want to do. Like they were very supportive, and they showed me through their own actions that when you want to do something, you just got to go do it and work hard for it and get it. So they showed me through their own actions, but also really, I think, supported me to do what I wanted, but also didn't really have the emotional skills to support me, you know, in that regard. So I a lot of my childhood, I understand this now through a lot of my work in the last 5 years of my life or 10 years of my life, but I really felt alone a lot of the time emotionally. I didn't feel as much support as they could give me kind of materially, or, you know, you want to do guitar lessons? Okay, we'll get you, you know, like they were always right there. Or if I needed something, they were right there. And whenever I needed emotional support, they didn't know how to do that and they weren't there, you know? Not that they probably didn't want to, or it, you know, it didn't come from a place of anything but just a lack of awareness about how to do that, or just like reaching into the toolkit and not finding any tool there, right?
They just didn't know how.
Totally.
And how did you think you balanced if you weren't getting the emotional support from them? Where were you finding that from, or where were you cultivating parts of your life to give you some of that?
I don't know. Like when I look back now, and like I said, I've done a bunch of deep work to get back into those states of those times in my life, into those states of mind, and to understand, like I definitely just felt very alone. I felt very outside. Like I didn't really know how to connect with others in a way emotionally. So I often, even in friend circles, never really felt like part of anything. I kind of always just felt like this autonomous person. And so that was tough. But I think the one place, I really think that music was the main place that I don't want to sound super dramatic, but like I feel like it saved my life. Like I feel like it's the one place where I had an outlet, where I could express myself, where I could explore and be creative. And for most of my life, the only way that I've been able to receive love is through recognition and acknowledgement. And I was good at music, and I played shows, and people knew who I was, and like there was like a whole ego thing. Like it supported me in that way. And so for that time, that was the only way I knew how to feel love, was to be acknowledged for achievement. So it was that, but mostly I'd say music saved my life because I was able to express myself through lyrics and writing songs and playing music, and it's so interesting. Like I think we were talking about this, but I looked back. I would always write songs, and people would say to me, "Wow, that's a really sad song," and I'd say, "Oh, it's not sad to me. You know, I don't see it that way." But looking back, I'm like, "Wow, those are really sad songs sometimes." You know, so I think even I wasn't even able to connect with how I was feeling emotionally at that time, even as I was expressing it in a song or in music. It was like almost like I would go offline, the emotions would come out, and then I would come back online, and I would probably feel better. You know, like to me, it felt like when I look at all the role that music played, it was like this. It was the only outlet I had to express myself.
And you were just getting it out there.
Yeah,
just getting it out there.
Because when I was really young, I remember these phases, like these times where I would kind of get so built up with sort of, it would come out, it would like with emotion, it would just end up coming out as anger. Like I would just sort of flip out once in a while. I was usually a very steady, very happy, very outgoing, super extroverted, you know, person. But once in a while it would get built up, and then I would just flip out in my room and I would tear shit apart, and I would just, it would be like this anger that just needed to come out, this emotion that just needed to come out. By then it had calcified into anger. Probably didn't start as anger, you know, but
just starts off as pain.
Yeah,
of some sort.
Pain, aloneness, whatever, like confusion, like all the things, you know, you're growing up. There's lots of confusion. There's lots of emotions, and if you're never taught that expressing emotion is okay, or that there's a way to do it, or that it's healthy, then you just bottle it up.
Right.
And then it pressurizes and calcifies and comes out as anger. Right.
And you carry it with you through a few more years and maybe a few more decades.
Yeah.
Until you can't anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's wonderful that you had music as an outlet. Just reflecting on my experience, I grew up playing piano, Royal Conservatory. Parents put me in it. Not that I loved it at the time, but when you know how to play an instrument, it's sometimes nice to get lost in it.
Absolutely.
And like it's not even just playing the instrument, it's just feeling it through your body. Absolutely. And then also what it brings up to you to play like certain notes. It is a wonderful healing tool if you know how to play.
It is
something.
And the vibrational aspect of playing, and you're right, getting lost in it, and that sort of flow state you can enter into. All of those things are really beautiful. And the other thing is that I feel like music was the first place that I learned how to be intimate with others. Like being in a band is intimate when you're writing music, when you're serious about it. Like it's just an intimate place to be when you're exposing your vulnerability through music and you're exploring. Like people always say being in a band is like being married to multiple people, and that's what it really was. And it was hard and whatever, but it was actually the first place that I had a committed relationship, and learned a lot about that, mostly in retrospect. 'Cause but yeah, like I look back now and how much I learned from doing all of that, like all those different aspects of music, collaborating, expressing myself, all this stuff. Yeah. I'll also just say about my parents is that like they gave me a tremendous amount of gifts, and I it's interesting, through my work, through my inner work and through my psychedelic work, I feel like I've healed so much of my relationship, especially with my mom. I feel like my mom and I have a lot of similarities, and there's a lot there, and I just appreciate both of them so much, and I'm so grateful for them, you know. And it's so interesting that you go like it's easy to stay in this place where I blame my mom for this, or I blame my dad for this, and I think as long as you're doing that, you're not actually free. Like you're not free until you expect nothing from your parents anymore, right?
Yes.
Until you're able to actually do that. And I feel like only in the last 5, maybe a few more years have I been making that transition to realizing, you know what, my mom and dad did the absolute best job they can, and they really worked hard at raising us, and I'm so lucky for what I did have. And like that's the generational sort of growth that happens, is they were miles ahead of their parents in terms of emotional ability to care for me, and it was still pretty limited, and I am like the next layer of that. And because they were able to create just an extra inch of space for me, I can now create an extra inch of space, or more maybe. Like it feels like an exponential growth, actually, generationally.
What a beautiful way to look at that as an expansion. You said both of your parents are no bullshit kind of people. Are you the same?
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
do you have a good detector for it?
Yeah. And it's like, it's kind of again, there's lots of everything in extreme is can be useful and it can be harmful. But I think in general, I've never been able to sort of do kind of social politicking kind of thing. I've never really understood some of those dynamics where it's like, why aren't we just saying the thing here? And also just not, if someone, like in terms of the companies I've had or the clients, like I will never tolerate a certain level of disrespect towards my team, or like if a client wants to, I ran agencies for lots of years, or probably in the Cheaper Show, there was some cases of this where there's certain lines that it doesn't matter. There's no amount of money that's going to allow me to allow certain behavior or certain energy into my life. And that's always been fairly steadfast. Like, so that no bullshit kind of thing is mostly around just basic respect and ownership of how you're, there's definitely times where it takes me a minute, but I usually will come around and take ownership for, you know what, in that interaction we had yesterday, that was bullshit. I shouldn't have done that, or like, that was me, that was my own stuff. And I apologize for showing up like that, and I try to do that as much as possible. And I just expect a basic level of people trying to do that as much as possible.
Right. That's a very, I feel, listening to that, I'm like, oh, that's such a great way to be. What a noble way to be like, oh, sorry, I was not in my best. I mean, I don't think it happens like super often, to be honest.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel a level of fear in their life that doesn't allow that to be possible, right? Like if you have a sense of, there's like this underlying existential dread that if anybody finds me out or sees the weakness in me, it's all going to fall apart, my whole life. Like no one's going to respect me, or I'm going to lose my whatever. And I think that, that to me is one of the things I really hope to share with people, is that sense that, the more you open up to yourself and to others, the more the whole world just kind of opens up to you, And that kind of sharing is actually the key. Yeah. The key to depth of relationship, to progressing, to moving yourself forward and moving others around you forward.
And for increasing forgiveness, like all around.
Yeah. And it also requires you to be able to forgive yourself.
First and foremost, almost.
Yeah. Austin and I were having a big conversation in the car today, because we're working together, we're living together, we're doing everything, we're like very intertwined. And in certain ways, like our values and lots of things, we're super similar. Like we're very, like we're a perfect pairing in that way. And we're also both very alpha. Like we're both very stubborn and alpha and have our way of doing things. And so being business partners and working together it comes with its like flare-ups for sure. Yeah, right? And in the car today, we were sort of at this impasse, and I realized, okay, the conversation we had yesterday about this, I can own why I was, it got really emotionally intense for me. And that the actual reason is that I have this fear of being alone and doing things by myself. I've had it my whole life. And that's where the emotionality came from. It didn't come from you. I was projecting it onto you. But actually, I just have a deep fear of being left alone, or having to, like, I've always had this thing where when I'm doing a project, I don't even notice the people trying to help me sometimes. Because, and I'd say that's less so today than in the past. But in the past, there'd be times where I had all these people trying to help out and participate, and I'd be like, no, I just got to do it by myself. Because back when I was 6 years old and I was upset and I was stomping around my room being angry, no one came in. to say like, I'm with you. It's okay to be angry. Let me give you a hug, you know? And so that sort of thing is still there on some level. And it's funny now, it's not like constantly permeating my existence, but it like builds up and it flares up and it comes out. It's like, I'm still here.
Yeah.
You're still alone. You should get angry about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when you opened up about that, I feel like that just allows the other person to just understand you and see you more. And it feels less scary, I imagine.
Yeah. And suddenly we're talking about the real thing.
Right.
We're not talking about what's really interesting is you get into like and we were in this, and we're probably still got a little more to go, but in this current round of this, but we're talking about what's going on between us as if all this underlying stuff isn't there. And therefore the conversation is very confusing. Like there's no real truth in it. You're trying to grasp on to what the other person is saying. She's trying to figure out like, what are you telling me? Like, and I'm trying to figure out like, what are you seeing in this situation? But what's actually happening is we're both running some deeper level programming that and as soon as we talked, as soon as I said something about that, she could say something about that. And the whole energy was able to just release a bit, because suddenly we're actually, okay, that's the real thing we're talking about here. And the 2 or 3 layers up, like that stuff can be very, it could just be very confusing, because it's sort of real. It is happening, but it's not what's actually happening. It's not the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is I'm flared up because my fear of having to do this alone, because certain things that I'm expecting from you that aren't showing up and we're just not talking about. And and when I start to get frustrated, this was what happens for you. This thing flares up in you. And then we're having a real conversation, and that's an easy conversation because we both, it's not easy, but it's like clear at least. Yeah.
Yeah. The clarity of things. That's where you hope to get to.
Yeah.
As a person and with others, and
hopefully.
Well, I'd like to go back to, you were talking about music and the band. That was a huge part of your life, being in a band from your teens to into your 20s.
It was.
Yeah. And then
it's my whole life.
Your whole life. And then things changed when the band broke up. And that was a huge thing. I remember you saying you wrote a bunch of songs, and weren't you saying that you recently listened to the songs and finally felt what you were trying to say back then? Yeah,
super interesting. Well, like, so I started a band when I was like 2 weeks before I got a guitar. I started my first band, and it morphed a few times. The first band name was Psychotic with 2 Ks in there. So it's pretty awesome. I can still draw you the logo. It's all kind of lightning bolt letters. It's pretty awesome. So this is in grade 7. I was like, we're starting a band. It's going to be called Psychotic. Anyway, it slowly morphed into a real band, and started to evolve. And then it really morphed into this really beautiful project. And we were, I think, creating really beautiful, interesting music that was original. And anyway, we were, to me, it was my life's work. You know, I was only 15 through 20 something, but I kind of have that thing about me. Like I think it's one of my gifts is connecting to purpose, being really connected to my purpose all the time. And the purpose shifts and it evolves and it gets more refined as I get older. But when I'm doing something, like I'm all in. And so I had that. We were together for a number of years. And then in our early 20s, our drummer decided he just didn't want to focus on music anymore. And it was like a blind side. Like I've had to have the bass player in the band, who's still a close friend of mine, who lives in Montreal. He had to actually explain to me the sort of 2-year span where we were kind of breaking up but still playing together. It was like a classic messy relationship thing where we were still together. My drummer has a lot of deep dynamics. He's had a lot of loss in his family. He has a lot of issues with letting people in. He lives out in the wilderness in Alaska. Like he has a family now, but he doesn't talk to anybody hardly. And So he has his own thing going on. So, but we're all in our 20s, and he decides he's just out. But then we're still together for a number of years because music is deep in his soul too. But he was like, I don't want to play music anymore. I'm going to go be an outdoorsman, and I'm going to be a paramedic, and that's what I'm going to do. So anyway, it's like this messy few years that I literally blacked out because I think it was I didn't know how to deal with it. I had no recollection of the order of events and how they happened. And my bass player only a couple of years ago was like, when you're describing that, you have it totally wrong. That's not what happened. Like, it started with this, and then 6 months later this happened, and then we went and recorded all those songs, and then this happened, and then I was like, oh shit. Like I really have no way of putting together the pieces of that period of my life. Super interesting. And frankly, after that happened, I basically continued playing music for a while, but really the dream of being a musician for my life kind of thing was winding down. And I think had I processed the emotional loss of that first band ending properly, I probably would have kept playing music. But to me, I just couldn't. It just was really challenging. I was just in a really stuck period of my life in my mid-20s. And so that all happened. And yeah, it was a really interesting transition. It was like the first big ego death of my life, where I'm no longer like this thing that I project myself as, like see myself as, like my whole identity is wrapped up in. That's over, or that's ending, that's winding down. And right at that time, I was actually doing a bunch of design work and digital work and really enjoying it. I actually really loved coding, but in my mind, it was always a side gig to do because music was the thing and my whole identity. And it was super strange for me going from being a musician, which in my mind was cool, to being like a designer coder, which was not cool. Like it was just hard. It was a hard transition.
I'm really curious about talking about kind of this blackout period you have where you weren't really remembering the flow of how things happened. Do you feel like that was maybe some denial that there was an unraveling happening?
Oh yeah.
With the band?
Oh yeah.
But you just wanted to keep going and.
Yep. 100%. And I think that I was, I didn't, like that's in my early 20s. I didn't do my first kind of big emotional exploration workshop kind of work until I was in my mid to like 26, 27. And so I would imagine, if I look back at myself, that I was so driven and so sort of emotionally blind to what anybody else wanted, and that you're either on the Steve train or you weren't. Like that kind of energy, I'm sure. And had I been able to sort of feel out where my drummer was at that time and work with him more, or probably be able to compromise more, or whatever, I don't know. But there's likely a whole other scenario that could have happened had we had the emotional tools. Like him and I, actually everybody in the band, we had like this, it was like a deeply impactful relationship that it was a kind of a core three of us, and there's a bunch of others that played with us, but it was really the core three of us. And like we all came from totally different scenarios in life, and really like, man, like we didn't know it at the time, but we were everything to one another. And it was a lot, but it was kind of like, it's like a fireball, and we're in our 20s, or like teens and 20s, and we're just an emotional mess, kind of all of us were, in different ways. I was the most stable of them.
Yeah.
I was able, like I had solid, stable parents. I had good support. I generally was functioning highly, but emotionally I was lost. It's interesting, like all of that happened. I moved on. I started some other bands. I did a solo album. I did all this other stuff. But it wasn't actually until my mid-30s when I went and did a 10-day Vipassana. I went and sat for 10 days in silence. That was the first time, and it came out of nowhere on day 6 or 7 of the meditation, where all this emotion just came up about that scenario. I didn't even know I was emotional about all of that until well over a decade later.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
It took a long time. I hadn't even thought about my drummer in over 10 years. And then at the Vipassana, all this stuff came up about him. I hadn't heard his name. I hadn't thought of him. I hadn't talked, we still haven't communicated besides a couple texts. I've been trying, but he's kind of, he'll take his time. But yeah, like I just completely blocked out that I felt anything about any of that. I just moved on. I started a new band. I got a new thing going. I did this and that. In the meantime, I was hurting. Like I was in pain. And
it took complete silence to finally kind of hear that.
Yeah, it took a whole bunch of other personal work and then 10 days of complete silence. And I had my first 5-MeO experience like 3 or 4 weeks before we went to silent retreat.
Oh, okay.
So I did my first 5-MeO. I came out of that realizing, oh yeah, what the fuck am I doing not going and doing this 10-day? I'd been talking about doing this 10-day meditation for a long time, years. And Austin had been saying, I would really like to go do this with you. And I'd always said, oh yeah, I'm too busy, but I'd love to do that. One day we'll do that, And I came out of 5-MeO and I was like, it was just like immediate.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's sign up as soon as possible. Let's go. So there was like those events plus other personal, I've been doing personal work since my 20s, but I'd never gone back and touched that sort of soft, painful spot in my life.
Yeah.
And it didn't even like, when I went and did the 10-day Vipassana, it's not like I went there to heal that part of my life or anything. I had no idea that things would come up. Like there was kind of 2 core themes that came up in my 10-day Vipassana, but that was one of them.
And yeah, when you did that, you're in a completely different chapter of your life. This was your agency years, and you kind of think that you've moved past it when you move to that next phase of your life. You're like, oh yeah, all that stuff, it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't hurt me or whatever that is. And lo and behold, one day out of nowhere. Yeah.
And I came out of that saying, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can. I don't have any expectation for my drummer he doesn't owe me anything, but I'm going to reach out to him and try and just connect with him again, because that was an important relationship in my life and there's healing there for us. And around that time, me and the bass player had reconnected, and like whenever he flies out, we try to spend time and just make some music for fun and have just talk, like, and it's been very healing even for my bass player to explain those things to me and help me open those parts of our life out, and for both of us to acknowledge how important we were to each other and are to each other. Wow. Like that's been very healing for me too. Yeah.
And so was that, you were talking about your first 5-MeO experience, was that your first really deep experience with it, or had you been dabbling before? Had you done ayahuasca prior to that? I guess I'm just trying to pinpoint when psychedelics really started to come into your world.
Psychedelics came into my world when I was 15, 16. Okay. Yeah. I actually had some really big mushroom experiences in those years. I didn't experiment with really anything besides mushrooms, and I was smoking a lot of weed, but that's different. But yeah, I had some mushroom experiences that were profound, and like I do feel like they helped actually shape who I am and shape this sort of path of discovery that I've been on since my teens. Like the path of discovery, meaning it comes from sort of out of nowhere that I would become somebody who's constantly seeking a level of spirituality and a level of depth and a level of emotional rawness and all these things that I've been seeking. I think started in my teens, and I don't know if psychedelics started them or if they were just a great catalyst to help accelerate that. But those were my first experiences. Mm-hmm. Really beautiful, very profound, actually, and not intentionally profound. They just were.
That's so interesting that you're saying this, because I listened to a Rich Roll podcast, a recent one, and there was a clinical psychologist on there, an author. Her name's Dr. Lisa Miller. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she wrote The Spiritual Child, which I think was a bestseller, and she just has this new book called The Awakened Brain. But she and Rich were talking about how there is a point, and they've done studies around this, where adolescents are they're on the spiritual hunt.
Yeah.
They're looking for that transcendent experience.
Yes. And
Dr. Miller was saying it's important for adolescents to have this, like some cultures have this coming to age, kind of ceremony that they 100%. Do that is this and
I've
they
been talking
feel
about
that.
this for like the last multiple weeks, actually. This
Oh,
exact thing. Yeah.
okay.
Not about that conversation. I haven't heard that, but yeah, that's so
Yeah,
interesting.
I think you would really. I'll send it to you. It's a great conversation. But she was saying that adolescents should, even if they can't really understand that it's a spiritual experience, to
Yep.
feel the transcendence is important. And I started thinking about, oh, well, what was mine when I was a teen? And you were saying you've done mushrooms when you were a teen,
Yeah.
so this kind of opened it up. And I didn't do any drugs back then, but and I think I might have
So
shared
you
this
had an
for
experience.
you. Yeah, my biology sailing trip,
Yeah.
where yeah, I think I was 16 or 17, and I signed up to go on this amazing biology trip on a sailboat. But my best friend and I were the last two to sign up for it, meaning
Right.
that there was no room for us to sleep on board, but we had to row a dinghy, which was really irresponsible of our teachers to let us do this, because we were just doing
You
it on
lived.
our own.
Come on. Give him a break.
Okay, you're right. I lived, and actually it's totally fine, because on the second day we were rowing to shore to set up our tent, and all of a sudden the water around us started to light up purple and all kinds of colors, and I just remember thinking, I am so lucky that I get to see this. I've never seen this before, and just that feeling of, oh, there's so much more to this universe
Yeah.
and me and all things than I know.
Yeah, isn't
And
that beautiful?
that was my first transcendent experience, and I still carry it with me, and I still talk about it.
Yeah.
If it comes up in conversation, I'll share it.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a similar experience being on a hike on mushrooms and coming to this viewpoint and looking out and seeing this whole canopy of trees on this hillside, and it was foggy, and I just felt like I could see them all spiraling and breathing as one, like just this massive lung of the universe kind of thing, or lung of the earth. And it was an experience that will stay with me forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had a number of experiences. Like, I don't think it requires substances to have those experiences, but I definitely had those experiences making music as well. There's certain moments of playing music that I'll never forget, like really specific moments where it's like one was just in a basement with three guys that I was playing with, and the sound we started making and the music that started coming out was this. I could see our energy combining and becoming another energy above all of us.
Incredible.
And and so those kind of things, they just stick with you. And I've been thinking a lot about how could we create some experiences for you're turning 16 and you can come have some kind of experience that would be just help people have a profound experience and an awakening in that way.
Yeah.
Even, like you say, at that age, you don't have a ton of ability to process it or it's not like you make a big deal of it at the time. You don't necessarily have to, but there's something there that will stick and that will become part of you. Like, I think what you described and what I described there with the trees and the bioluminescence is this sense that there's something much bigger than us at play here, and that we're part of it.
Yes.
And that to me is like, that kind of core belief is so important, because then when things are tough or when you're going through a struggle part of your life, you can still, there's sort of like there's like a rope hanging down to pull yourself out of the hole in some way, that like, oh, I'm connected to something much greater. I'm not alone in the universe.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's also, and this just came to mind right now, is that to witness something like that is also to witness mystery. Like, I had no idea, like, what are these things? There must be so much more of this stuff that I have never seen.
So awesome to be that age and have no idea what's going on and just be like, wow.
Yeah. Like, I have no idea what's happening, but
so
you know
cool.
what? I'm just gonna take it all in. So yeah. And now you've pivoted into this phase of your life of doing this type of work of holding space and doing ceremonies with 5MEO, which I have recently come back from and had quite the profound experience. What made you decide or choose this path? Was there a moment where you thought, this is what I'm supposed to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the interesting thing about everything that we're doing right now is that I had all these psychedelic experiences early in my life, and then I had some in my 20s as well. And then and Austin did too. She had her own, like, totally different things happened and different experiences, but she had similar. She had her own experiences with these medicines. And then when we met, when we were both about 30, she was a partner in a business and grinding away at getting something off the ground, and I was just starting Briteweb, and we were building in Paris. Our daughter, Austin's daughter, became my daughter, was just turning 13. So we kind of met at this period of our life where it's like adulting time, like serious adulting time. And so we didn't do anything together. We never did any substances together. I drank a bit. She didn't really drink. I can't remember if I was, yeah, we didn't do anything like this together at all for a number of years. Even though we both had this experience, but it's kind of like, I feel like you go through phases, and not everybody does, but I definitely went through this phase where I felt like there was I had to compartmentalize parts of me in order to, it's time to be serious now. It's time to wear like business shirts and go be a business guy and do this sort of thing and play a different game, you know? Mm. And so that was just the first few years of our partnership together. Thinking about that and doing some of that work privately, just with groups of people and friends and exploring. And then we had a friend of ours, a dear friend, who kept just saying, you need to come try 5-MeO. And it took a while because it sounded scary, and I had never heard of it before, and nobody was talking about it. There was like very little on the internet about it at that time, except for some pretty, I don't know, just scary stuff. And and so it took a while, and then we had our first experience with that, and that experience with 5-MeO was like unlike anything I'd done before. It just felt like a before and after awakening experience for me and for Austin, I think, too. And then we just felt like that's what we should be focused on. I guess I don't really believe in free will. I kind of believe that we believe we're making choices, but actually what we're doing is just, we have a certain amount of experience and we're in a certain place at a certain time, and we have certain programming, and then you think you're making a choice, but really you're just activating what's already been decided for you.
Yeah, you're just falling into place, really.
Yeah. And to me, this work has been the work I've been doing over the last 5 years has really been about how much can I surrender to just that flow and stop making any decisions at all, you know? And when I do make decisions, realize that all I'm doing is just like revealing what's already there to the best of my ability at that time. And the more that I'm in alignment with my values and alignment with the energy that's around, like the more aware I am, the more present I am to the actual, like the more present I am in that very moment, the better that quote unquote decision is. All it is like the more aligned it will be to actually what the universe is doing.
Yeah.
Right? And the easier it'll be and the less energy it'll take, and it'll just flow.
And also the better facilitator you become for holding space for others, which you and Austin do so well. I was actually reflecting on the ceremony. I mean, I've been reflecting a lot on it, but I realized that the experience that I had with you guys was not just in that room. It was from our first conversation to the way that there was the prep work, like the intake form and the calls to make sure that we go over what I've said in the intake form, to when you arrive on the property. And in the property too, you guys probably just naturally created a space that ignited all senses, from what we were eating to just visually how everything looked, to the warmth of you and of the support people that were there, and the candles and the flowers, like everything. I realized that activating all of those senses before my ceremony was actually essential to me being able to be in the most ideal state for my experience, to drop deeper into, what I experienced for that hour and a half,
beautiful.
2 hours.
Yeah.
So it just wasn't that long. And also the wonderful people that were there with me, the 3 others.
Yeah, all of it, right?
All of it. All of it was part of the healing.
Yeah. I appreciate that you see all of that. That to us is like all of the hidden hand of facilitation. And good facilitation looks like you're doing nothing at all. Like it's just there. Like everything's just in place. I think good facilitation is really about also, it has nothing to, you're not making it about you in any way. Like it's just happening. And it's actually the reason we've become more public about what we're doing at all is that we made a conscious decision to try and make sure that people, as these psychedelic medicines become well known and become more popular, that we can share that perspective, that all of those steps are important, that actually facilitating medicine ceremonies isn't knowing how to hold the pipe or how to measure the medicine or any, like those are important details in some respect, but they're easy to learn. Anybody can learn how to measure medicine or do something like that. And so we see a lot of people launching 5-MeO training or doing things where it's like a weekend where there's so many details that go into making somebody feel safe and feel trust. And that safety and trust, the level of safety and trust you feel is directly correlated to the level of breakthrough you can have and the level of growth you can have from that experience.
Absolutely. Having gone through it, having you both there, and even when you were holding space without saying anything, I just could feel holding space is, it's not doing what I'm doing now and holding space for others in sound therapy sessions.
Yeah,
it's energetic work.
Yeah.
And it's its own kind of labor.
It is.
And it's so important. I think I was telling you that I have a friend who, for some reason, decided to buy a bunch of 5-MeO from wherever, and it's in his house. He hasn't done it yet. But I came back from Enfold, and I said to him, do not do that on your own. Please do not, because you need experienced people there to support you as you're going through this rocket ship of a ride.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very strong psychedelic.
Especially the first time. And but all psychedelics carry with them this risk of dysregulation and this risk of radically advancing what your perception of the world is. But advancement is not always positive, right? So if you don't have the right support around you through the experience, before and after the experience, you can kind of be shown something that you have no capacity to manage, right? And and that's what dysregulation comes from. You suddenly, everything you thought you knew can be thrown out the window in those ceremonies. And that's part of the beauty of it. That's kind of the point in a lot of ways, but that's like, it's kind of like how for a while everybody was talking about disruption, like in tech or something, like disruption. Everybody's using the word disruption. Well, like that's not just disruption for the sake of disruption is not helpful. If you're not being mindful of what the second and third order consequences of everything that you're doing are, and if you're not processing the disruption you're bringing to yourself, like with psychedelics, then it's not helpful. It's just dysregulating. And like I can't remember if it's Alan Watts or one of the other sort of philosopher sort of folks from that time, but there's a couple of them that were basically really against psychedelics. They kind of said like, don't skip the line. And awakening happens in the time frame it's supposed to happen. Now, I don't exactly agree with that because I'm happy to help advance people, but I think people need to realize that you don't get anything for free, and you can't just accelerate that without the proper support and tools.
Yes. And also the work, what I appreciate about what you guys are doing too is, I know if you feel like people aren't prepared, you'll say, come back after you've done a little bit more work, whether it's breath work or just putting yourself into altered states. And I think that that's really important because, with close friends that I've been sharing my experience with, I said to them, this is not a silver bullet.
No.
Like you have to be prepared. And that means that you have done some kind of work or self-reflection. And and it's so interesting how you're talking about things just kind of falling to place, or times in your life preparing you for the next chapter of your life. And I was thinking about my experience again, and I think that if I had done 5-MeO when I was still in my corporate job, I would have had such a different experience. But moving into my work now, which is sound therapy, having this podcast and other things that are more aligned with me, those things help me become more aligned with my body and my feelings, and just more somatic feeling, because I think I disassociated for a really, really long time. And all of that helped me prepare for this, to trust my body, because the experience once you're in there is, at least with what I experienced, I really felt like I was dissolving away. I know it wasn't my body, it was definitely my ego, but the somatic feeling is you're leaving to somewhere, and then also you're becoming part of something that you've never felt before. And
you're returning.
Consciousness, you're returning to energy and consciousness. And I don't use the word God too often, and but that's what it felt like. And there should be no shame in using that word anyways, or whatever
you resonate with.
But it felt like I was in the presence of God.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I think that's why everybody has such a different experience with these, So first off, just to say that in terms of us thinking about who's ready, we are really careful about that. So 1 in 5 at least is kind of screened out. But also we have a beautiful process of really most of our people that we talk to come through referrals. And so that's like a pre-screening that we don't have to do. That's just, you can do because you understand the experience and you know who in your life may be ready for that. And like you have an intuition that's part of the screening process, is all the prior guests' intuition, right? So that's beautiful. So there's that piece of it. But then people, and so it's also part of the way that the group that you were in felt great, because everyone was in different places in their life and going through different levels of good and hard and challenging and whatever in their own lives. But everybody who was there was nobody totally shouldn't have been there, and that would have dysregulated the whole group or thrown off the whole group's dynamic, right?
Yeah.
So we're pretty careful about that. But then also sometimes people are, like lots of people are in their corporate jobs, and they are coming, and their experience is just going to be a little bit more challenging coming out often if they feel misalignment in the thing that they're in. So I think that's what I always try to drive home for people, is that you're not coming to have this big wow experience. You're coming to have a shift in perspective, that when you go home, that you can't just turn that off. Like that's just part of, like that's what you're signing up for. You're signing up for like a new level of awareness, a new level of sensitivity, a new level of perception of what's important to you. And then you're going to have to decide what you do with that. Right? Like psychedelics are just a key to open the door, and then you see what's through the door, and you got to decide what you do with that, right?
Right.
And so I always just try to make sure people understand that when you're coming to this, you're signing up for a process that doesn't end when you leave our retreat. It just begins.
Yes.
Like it really starts the next day, is your first day back in your home, maybe with your people or alone, or going back to work on Monday, or whatever your life is. Like you're going back, and that's where the actual magic and work begins. And so as long as somebody understands that and is ready to sign up for that, that's what to me means they're ready. And there's certain people that I would say who haven't done enough personal work, that 5-MeO is just going to blast them too far too fast. It's kind of like that skipping the line idea. Like maybe you need some microdoses, or maybe you need some meditation or some sound work, or something that's going to be a little bit more gentle to you than this one, which is the rocket ship, right?
It's definitely not.
Which is the Everest.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the Everest for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the after part is is very interesting. You definitely feel this sense of clarity, like just like your brain got a mighty wash. It feels very clean. I felt like my vision was clear. I was describing to you in our one-on-one that I felt like you looked crisper to me, but also that your movements looked more fluid.
Yeah, like you were seeing at a higher bit rate.
Yeah, yeah, it was really interesting. And that fluidity lasted probably like a good 2 weeks. And now it's a little bit less, but if I stop a little bit, then I can see it again. Whereas before I was just like, oh, I just see it. Now I have to kind of take a break and then.
Yeah, but you can drop back into that space because you have other tools that you've built for yourself and processes and practices to get back to that state, right?
Yeah. And the fluidity is so interesting because to me, it just felt like everything in this world is connected, even though I can't see the invisible network or thread that connects everything. I just knew. And that's why, to me, everything seemed fluid. Was that just natural flow of life, the symphony of life, as I was calling it, or that everything belongs.
Yeah, beautiful. And what it brings up for me just a level of presence that it's like the Matrix, like you're able to slow things down and suddenly you can just see more. You see more of what's happening in the moment when no part of you is anywhere else. When no part of your mind is working on some other thing that you're concerned about the next moment or the next day, or like you're just right here, right now.
Right.
It slows everything down. You're just your bit rate for information of this moment goes way up.
Yeah.
When half your mind is worrying about some future state, there's no way you can achieve as much presence in the moment as you could otherwise, right?
And the world will test you for sure. I had a moment this week where it was my fault. I didn't do a shoulder check and I pulled out of a parking spot and didn't see the person. Thankfully, we didn't hit each other, but she slammed on the horn and she was yelling at me in the car, and like I reacted in the same way. And I was like, oh my gosh, like wow, okay, I need to take a look at that. Like reacted in the same way, she was giving me the finger and
totally. And
wow,
you got super activated.
I got so activated. And almost.
Did you yell at her? I just want to know. You're so like.
No, but I did give her the double finger in the rear view for a long time, for the entire duration of a light.
Thank you for owning that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I can't actually imagine you doing that, but I love that you're telling me this. Okay.
Yeah. Well, she did make the crazy sign behind me, and I think that's what activated me. I was like, no, I am not. But anyways, yeah. And it was interesting because I feel like I was activated even more than previously. So maybe it's that sensitivity.
I actually just think you're probably more aware of your activation than you otherwise would have been.
Oh.
Like you're more sensitive to the fact that you're being activated. Like I think a lot of people go back into their regular life and be like, man, I was way more stressed out this week actually. And it's like, no, you were probably that stressed out last week. You just feel it. You're more tapped in, and it's not as, I think it's less comfortable. And you were probably less comfortable with that whole exchange than you may have been at some other point in your life, right?
100%. I'm actually, now that you say that, later on that night, I was like, oh, I wish this is how I reacted. And then I had this whole conversation in my head where I would just roll down my window and just say, we're okay. I'm really sorry. I should have shoulder checked. Yeah. Like, I don't think I would have ever stopped before and like, what would I have done in a higher self way?
Yeah. And I ultimately feel like this work, certainly for myself, and I hope for others too, is consistently practicing having that space for others more. Because when we do, right, like in this time it didn't work, so it's okay. And maybe next time it will though, right? Next time something like that happens, because you're more aware, because you're actively trying to learn and reprogram from that experience, maybe the next time you will have more capacity where that person is clearly so tight and wound that all they can do is yell at you because they were jolted. All they were doing, all that happened is they were jolted into awakeness and their tension came out at you, whatever was going on for them, right? And it's easy to just get activated by that energy and do the same thing back, you know, like, oh, I'm being threatened, so let's fight. You know, it's like two dogs. If one starts barking and the other, and then suddenly they're scrapping in the dog park.
Yes.
It's not that different. Just we're animal. We have animalistic characteristics, but the more that we can practice having that spaciousness for others in those moments, man, I can absorb a bit of this woman's anger for a second. That's okay. It doesn't have to. I can just let that pass through me. I can smile at her, I can diffuse it as much as I can, and go on with our day. And by doing that, I think in small instances, as we learn to do that better, everything, like the energy of the whole, like where is she going next, and how can that shift her energy next, and how, you know, like, so I think those are all the opportunities we constantly have, and that's what I'm constantly thinking about for myself. And I think the work we're doing is helping people feel spaciousness and then activate on that spaciousness in their lives by creating space for others, right?
Right.
Like with their partners or with their moms or with their whoever needs it. And there's usually, you know, and by feeling like a connection, like you said, like we were talking about earlier, feeling a connection with something greater, and 5-MeO gives you this grand sense of that often. And hopefully that can be cultivated into less fear, less scarcity, more space that you can then pass on to others. And it doesn't always work. And it's important to have those events of going, holy shit, I just spazzed.
Yeah,
you know?
spazzed big time.
Yeah, and
like,
wow, like that was, I'm disappointed in myself, and that's okay. But we're not perfect. We're not sitting in lotus position being Buddhas all the time.
No.
And this learning never happens unless we do get into those situations, until we are activated, until, you know, that's, to me, integration is not a 1 week after the psychedelic experience. It's the rest of your life is integrating that felt sense of what you know at your best when you really calm down and you've just had a beautiful yoga or meditation and or sound bath and you're zoned out and you're zenned out, bringing that into the moment when you're being honked at and yelled at or by some random activation happening.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for me, that instance wasn't just about that instance, but in me recognizing, and it's a long running joke that I have some incredible road rage, even though I'm such a chill person, but that's where it comes out.
That's where it comes out,
yeah. It comes out there. And so, yeah, I think in the 2 weeks after the ceremony, I was feeling way more chill driving. Just like, okay, if people want to come and go and come in front of me, it's totally fine. And then that happened, and I was like, what happened to my chill?
Right.
But yeah, I think it definitely is causing me to look at, you know, it's just a bigger thing, like.
Yeah.
And that's totally cool.
It is.
It's fine.
It is. As long as you have compassion for yourself. It's cool.
I mean, I laughed later on that night. I was like, whoa. The double finger, full light. I held it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway. But I wanted to ask about your wife. Is so incredible. She's like an otherworldly being. She's so ethereal. My question is, if you were going to write a mini love letter to her right now, what would it say?
Wow, that's hard to put into words. I think it would just say thank you, and that I live for you.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I can see the connection between you guys. It's very palpable. It's beautiful to watch.
The thank you has so much depth to it that I don't know, like, I could either write 20 pages or I could write thank you. Yeah.
And so where do you see Enfold going from here? Like, what's the next evolution of it?
I don't know. We have committed to staying really grounded with everything that we're doing. So following an emergent path, and an emergent strategy. An emergent path, the basic of these ideas, I think, come more from an indigenous lens on the world. And as it's been translated into, like emergent strategy, you can look it up and there's people in the business world talking about emergent strategy. But the basic idea is that our world and nature and all aspects of humanity are so complex that pretending that we know exactly what we should be doing 5 years from now isn't really realistic, and that it's not really helpful. What it ends up doing, I think, is setting you on a course that you get so entrenched that you don't recognize the opportunity in the moment. So really continually staying, okay, well, what do the next 6 months look like? What makes the most sense to do right now in the next 6 months, or say 12 months max? So that's what we're focused on, and we have some partners now, some fun, like investors, and we've had to be really clear with them that that's our strategy. So we're not making projections for 2 years or 5 years from now. We are going to be very disciplined and very clear and really thoughtful about everything that we're doing now and how we spend any money right now. But right now we're very focused on developing more of a community around our work that continues beyond the retreat experience. Mm-hmm. And the way I think about that is, how can we make people feel like they're back in our home even when they can't be back in our home?
Oh, that's wonderful.
So ways of bringing people together for meditations, or like little touch points, and some circles that we'll start doing. And we're also developing some content, like basically a program for people that'll start. It's a 28-day program that wraps around the psychedelic experience to just build more preparation and more integration into it. So we're working on those pieces. We're going to be doing some research on our work, and hopefully being able to contribute to perspective of 5-MeO. Like, I think the broadest aspect, the reason we accepted funding, the reason we're talking more publicly about what we're doing, the reason we are thinking about any type of growth at all, is really that we want to help as these things become mainstream, and as they become, we want to help steward them in a way that feels like we can maintain a level of spirituality around them and not overly medicalize, psychedelics. And so, like, not allow the psychedelics to basically be absorbed into the medical institutional system. Mm-hmm. And so kind of continue to shepherd that, and also to shepherd, what you described earlier about all those pieces being important. We want to help share that with the world so that others are inspired by that and recognize that. So looking at how we can partner with different institutions and organizations to build training and do all sorts of stuff like that is all interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's lots of things I know what we're going to do next and that we're working on right now.
Yes.
But where we'll be, I don't know. To me, that will be determined by the universe for us.
Yeah.
And through us over the next few years. Yeah. I think mostly we're really passionate about the work we're doing. It does really feel in many ways like the closest I can get to doing, and I'm not a religious person, but to doing God's work, like to being. I'm not connected to any religion. I think I am a religious person now. I can't help it. I'm a very spiritual person at this point, but I just feel like, how can I get as close as possible to doing this work? And this feels like it right now. Mm-hmm. So trying to stay close to that.
I love that you said that, in terms of just keeping that spiritual aspect and not getting it so it doesn't feel so clinical, because I have been reading some articles, and the thought of doing what I did in a cold space with, I think that I read somewhere where they're talking about just having just someone's voice being piped into a room.
Oh yeah.
I thought I wouldn't want to do it that way.
I don't want anybody to do it that way. And, but that's all coming, because there's lots of big money flowing into the space. And basically what I'm seeing is psychedelics are kind of screaming, like the earth to me, psychedelics are the immune system of the earth. And they are actually, like, it's an immune response of the earth to make psychedelics crop up and be like, to help these humans that are on earth wake up and stop destroying it. Right. And like, it's this, and it's this beautiful opportunity to reconnect. And I think I don't think the medical system intends to do this, but the medical system doesn't know how to connect humans with humans. It just can't. It just doesn't work very well. And in the best cases it does, but if you talk to most medical professionals, they're frustrated because they can't give the level of care that they wish they could. And we're not being preventative, and we're not looking at the whole human, and we're not connecting the psychology and the physiology of it. You know, there's all these things that are happening. So the whole medical thing is happening, and then there's big money flowing into the space, and it just wants a return on money. It just wants to make more money. So there's major influences at play, and these major sort of functions of society that are broken, and they're kind of coming in to try and extract value out of psychedelics. And so, like, we've been approached by investors who wanted to get involved with us with 5-MeO because they see 5-MeO, oh, it works really fast, so we can put this into a 45-minute clinic, like, go for an appointment. Like,
and just cycle people through.
Yeah, like, I'm in Yaletown. After this, I'm just going to pop over for my 11:35 MEO session, and then I'm going to go for lunch with my friends and go back to work.
I couldn't even imagine that.
Yeah, but there's people who are imagining that, and it freaks the shit out of me. So,
right.
You know, it's like, it's really interesting. So I think for us, I also recognize that all of these things they're just going to do what they're going to do. And, but we recognized a little while ago that doing these private ceremonies and nobody knowing about us wasn't enough. It wasn't enough contribution to this space. And so that's a big part of why everything we're doing now. Yeah, it's continuing to just share our perspective on it, and be humble enough to say, like, we're probably wrong about some of it, and we're going to keep learning. And a year from now, I'll probably look back and cringe at some of the things I'm saying right now, and that's okay. This is an emergent strategy. We're just learning as we go. Yeah.
Well, I have just a couple more questions, but before I ask my second to last, I will share that I think one of the most there were a lot of profound things that happened for me in that ceremony, during, after, even before. But I did ask Austin when my ceremony was, no, actually, this was just before dinner. And I asked her, how did the medicine know what I needed? And she just smiled at me and she said, you are the medicine. You know what you need. And then I remember you saying to me, the medicine just opens you up, but you know what you need. And I thought that was just a beautiful, lesson. Yeah.
That's why we never try to be predictive of, oh, May's coming and we've met with her a couple times and we think she needs this, and so while she's in the ceremony, we're going to say these things to her, and we're going to, like, no, it's not about that. It's about you exploring and expanding yourself, and about creating a safe enough container and a clear enough space. And we can do some gentle guidance, and some of the things we say before and after may have some impact, but really it's just about creating that container for your inner healer, for your deep knowing to emerge. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think about that quite often. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Nice.
My second to last question is, you were talking about your band days and your drummer, and knowing what you know now with who you are in this moment, what would you like to share with him or say to him about what you're grateful for him being in your life in that time?
Yeah. Man, I just love him. And it makes me emotional. Like, I know how much pain he was in. Like, he had, like, a lot of really hard things happen to him just as we were coming into his life, coming into each other's lives. And really, like, that time in my life was like some of the best experiences that I've ever had. You know, like, I look back on that with such gratitude, and his passion and his talent, and even when he was like just, like, yeah, could be a really challenging person at times. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful, and to know, like, I guess my perspective, we were who we were when we were around, like when we were together as a band and stuff like that. And whoever he is now is not that same person, and same for me. And that's like when I finally got his number and was able to send him a message. It was basically saying, look, man, like, I know I pissed you off and I did something, and I don't know if you still harbor some animosity or grudge, but I hope that we can just rise beyond that and just reconnect with no strings attached. I just want you to know that I'm grateful and I love you. And whatever happened back then, I just hope, I'm grateful. And I would love to reconnect with you because you are a very important person in my life.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he feels that.
Yeah, I think he does. And like I said, I don't ever expect to control others in any way, right? So he can do whatever he wants with that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's fine. All I can do is share my piece as best as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Final question. With what you do, what is it that you want to leave behind in the world?
The easiest way to say it, I guess, is just more spaciousness. That hopefully through the work that I do with others and the work that I do on myself and just how I can continually grow and show up in a more spacious way, that I can show others that we have so much space and there's no need to hold on to anything. There's no need to feel scarcity. There's no need to feel fear. And that we all have like an unlimited tap of love. And that's I would say that's how I would describe it, as spaciousness.
Well, I'm really grateful that you and Austin have come into my life, and I'm grateful for the space that you created for me. And for anyone else who will ever cross your guys' path, they'll know and they'll feel just the devotion you guys have to others and their well-being. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your friendship and for being here today. And I look so forward to spending more time with you and Austin.
Yeah, so do we.
Yeah.
Really do, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll say, with your ceremony and witnessing you go through that, it was just so clear the openness and work that you've done. Like, it was just really beautiful to see your strength and see the love that was there. Just seeing, like, it was a beautiful, easy ceremony to witness and a gift to us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for saying that. And in the end, it is just all about love and connection. And that's the beautiful part of one of the most beautiful parts of life. So thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that last conversation, be sure to check out more episodes of The Craft on Spotify and guest photo galleries on the website at wearethecraft.com. Thanks again for listening.